Right. Okay. G'day, it's Gary Callagher here. Welcome. We'll get underway. So can you just confirm to us the connection to the Teviot Community Board? Are they in the room with you or are they a separate connection?
Sorry.
Mark's joining online, is planning to join online.
Yeah, so the chair of the Teviot Community Board will be joining online as well, and we have one of the councillors who represents council on that board in this meeting as well.
Okay, great. I think that's what we were anticipating. So we will get underway. Welcome everyone. This is a joint workshop between CODC and Teviot Community Board and ORC, and great opportunity, and we should do more of this as issues and activities arise. So within the ORC room today, we have all councillors except Matt Collier and Michael Laws, and I think Michael Laws may be going to join online at some stage. And just we won't go around everybody doing introductions, but just within CODC, I think we have almost a full complement. Do we have there? Maybe Tamer, are you able just to confirm who you have there and before we move on?
Yep, thank you. We have the entire council here as well as a number of key staff from the executive leadership team. So thank you for having us.
Excellent, welcome. Thank you very much for that. So look, today this is about another step in the process for Roxburgh. It's been a long process. There is a long way to go. We have some new technical details, and today the plan is to share them. It is a workshop where we're just working through the technical findings. We'll have some time for questions throughout the workshop. I think we've got 2 hours set aside, but CODC need to get away by an hour and a half. So we're not going to look to delay where we can, but we will have questions, I think, at a couple of stages, so we'll make that clear. So let's get underway.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I am Jean-Luc Payan, the manager of the Natural Hazards team at the Regional Council, and I've got with me Julian.
Koto. Morning, councillors. My name is Julian Wright. I'm a natural hazards analyst at the Otago Regional Council, looking after the technical part of the Roxburgh work.
So the purpose of the workshop today is really to present new information on the characteristic of debris flood hazard and risk in the Teviot Valley area. The nature of that work is quite technical, so we thought a workshop is a good opportunity for everyone to hear the findings from the experts, but also have the ability to ask any questions you'd like on the work that's been done. It's a joint workshop, so it's great to have CODC and the board, the Teviot Valley board, for the workshop, and have them also asking questions if needed. As a way of introduction of the work, this work is a milestone study, but it sits in a sequence of work that we've been doing on alluvial fan in the region since 2009. So in 2009, we started a regional scale investigation looking at where are the debris flow alluvial fan areas in Otago. And since then, we've been zooming in areas where the debris flow and alluvial fan are more active, and Roxburgh and the Teviot Valley is one area. But today is not the end of that sequence of work. There's more work to be done, especially around what the new information means for different organizations. This is quite a complex setup with different organizations having different roles in managing the hazard. We've got ORC in charge of, for example, some of the stream management, linked with CODC on planning responses. We've got the civil defense part also, but also there are infrastructure that could be impacted by the hazard, state highways. So we're also working with NZTA. So this information, we're hoping this information is going to be key information for all those organizations to make decisions around hazard mitigation, around planning for infrastructure, and around land use. But it's also key information for the community to understand better the nature of the hazard and risks and make their own decision also in terms of protecting their own properties, protecting their own assets. So it's a multi-purpose type of work, but the key element of the work is it's a very now local understanding, refined understanding compared to what we've done before. So one of the next steps, and I'll cover that after at some stage in the presentation, is really think about what this work mean for everyone in terms of mitigation, planning, etc. So we have a two-step in presentation. We have first more detail on the background of that work and the Tiviot Valley. And after that, WSP, who helped us doing modeling and risk assessment, will present how this has been done and what it means. And we have questions at key stages in those presentations. So Julian is going to take over now and present the overall setup of the Tiviot Valley before the WSP team starts. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Thank you, everybody. So, as Jean-Luc mentioned, there is regional context to this work. So, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was the alluvial fans project, and that mapped alluvial fans across the Otago region. And at that time, alluvial fans were, and the hazards associated with them, were recognised in the Tiviot Valley. So some more detailed mapping of the landforms themselves was conducted in the Roxburgh area. It is important to remember that this was very high level mapping, and so it sort of showed where potential hazards on alluvial fans could occur and the landforms associated with them, but not a detailed modelling of the physical processes and risk themselves. So that information has been available publicly on the Otago Natural Hazards database. Yes. So I guess, firstly, just as a bit of background, what is an alluvial fan? As the name suggests, it's a fan-shaped landform that forms where a creek, so the alluvial, the flying of water, exits steeper hill country onto a more flat, unconfined area. So at the steeper reaches, this transports a lot of sediment. Where the break and slope occurs, that sediment is then deposited, and it's very dynamic and changeable. So that path over time has moved back and forth across that flatter area, and that has left over that fan-shaped landform, which you can see in that top graphic with the yellow area representing the fan. And the bottom image is of Reservoir Creek in Roxburgh, showing the approximate area of that alluvial fan. So the processes that can occur on an alluvial fan lead to a range of hazards. So you have flows from anything from simply clear water to flows that contain a lot more rock and sediment and debris. And these are known as debris floods, which is what we're here to talk about today. So these debris floods are more dense and rapid than typical clear water flows, so they are potentially more damaging. In addition, it's really important to recognise that the triggering for these types of debris flood events is usually associated with high intensity rainfall. So often in the Roxburgh area, this is associated with thunderstorm activity. And the nature of thunderstorms means that they can be quite difficult to predict and spatially variable, as we'll see in a moment. So there's been a number of past events in the Teviot Valley, and a lot of these have been recorded, perhaps through old newspaper clippings and such. But this really highlights that there's a range of catchments, a range of creeks where these types of debris floods can occur, and they have occurred multiple times throughout the years. However, the largest recent event, and by extension the one that we know the most about, was the November 26th, 2017 events. So this was triggered by a localized severe thunderstorm cell. So as you can see in the image on screen, and if I zoom in a bit, you get a clearer picture of some of the catchments where this occurred. So Roxburgh is noted there on the dot point, and the line denotes the Clutha River, approximately the same place as State Highway. And you can see that really intense rainfall. So those purple colours representing sort of upwards of 100 millimetres in 1 hour. That's sitting over the catchments where debris floods occurred. And then the rainfall accumulation maximum over that hour really dropping off to some areas quite close by, as little as 5-10 mil an hour. And so what this led to is 5 creeks where there were debris floods. So Pump Station Creek, Reservoir Creek, Golf Course Creek, and Blackjacks Creek. In addition to Stevenson's Creek, but the flow was contained within the channel there. So that just highlights that you can have a number of flows in a quite a localized area, and then further north and south you can have little or no impacts. So the impacts of the 2017 events were relatively widespread for the Roxburgh community. So we had a lot of the State Highway 8 crossings overwhelmed, and large debris deposited out of the channels onto the roads and on some property as well. Now, as some of you are aware, the Reservoir Creek channel has a concrete chute that is designed and built in the early 80s, and that conveys flows from higher up on the alluvial fan to the Clutha River. So what happened in 2017 is flows were initially contained within that chute, deposited at the Clutha confluence, as you can see in the image on the below right of the screen. From there, sediment sort of backed up the channel once that area for deposition was full. And then by the time it backed up to the State Highway, there was a point again where flows exited the channel. Fortunately, by that point, there was primarily water and finer grained sediments, but this did still cause a lot of localized flooding. In addition, there were a number of critical infrastructure damage, such as water and power infrastructure. So the 27 events prompted a lot of responses, and this was collaborated on from ORC, NZTA, CODC. Some of the key work that came out of that was NZTA replaced State Highway 8 culverts affected to increase capacity at a number of the creeks. CODC increased the resilience of the pump station at Pump Station Creek. In addition to this, ORC Natural Hazards team commissioned a number of follow-up investigations, including an assessment of the sort of post-event flood hazard of the Clutha, a sort of detailed assessment of the actual events themselves done by GNS in 2018, and then the start of some more detailed look at the hazard and potential management, which was the Golder reports finished in 2019. Those Golder reports also had the first high-level risk assessment, but it was not spatial across the fan. So it identified some creeks where the risk to life was potentially significant, but didn't look in detail at where these risks might be. So the overall hazard management for the Roxburgh debris floods over time since 2017, but also prior to 2017, is can be looked at in terms of the PARA framework. So the PARA framework is protect, accommodate, retreat, or avoid. And so management responses or approaches loosely can fall into these 4 categories. The main takeaway here is that there's a number of things that are currently being done across the framework to manage the hazard. In addition, if you note the colour of the responses, these denote who is responsible, which group is responsible for those. And so really the key takeaway is that it requires a lot of collaboration across a range of approaches to manage what is quite a complex hazard. This brings us to the current Roxburgh Natural Hazards Management Program in OSC Natural Hazards, and with the objective being to identify, assess, and potentially implement natural hazard risk management responses for debris flow hazards in the Roxburgh area. To address this, we have 2 current technical projects, the first one being an interim creek monitoring and maintenance plan, which is ongoing. The second, which is what we're here to talk about today, is the Roxburgh debris flood detailed hazard and risk assessment, which throughout that process has been in collaboration with CODC and NZTA. Underpinning everything and supporting all of that is a community engagement plan, also collaborated on for a number of groups involved in that. So the new detailed hazard and risk assessment also has a new study area compared to, for instance, the Golder reports, which looked at only the catchments affected by the 2017 events. So we included a broader range of catchments, so 13 in total, and this was based on a prioritisation process looking at that alluvial fans mapping. And this extended the area further than previously. So as Jean-Luc's already mentioned, that this piece of work, the hazard and risk assessment, follows up on a key recommendation of the Golder reports and really provides the detailed mapping and which is able to refine the larger scale and higher level regional data. It identifies also spatially and in a detailed way the areas debris floods are more likely to occur and where the risk is potentially higher. And as Jean-Luc has already spoken to, it's a multi-purpose and milestone study. So I guess, is there any questions at this point before handing back over to Jean-Luc?
Thank you. And just Tamer, maybe questions at your end from your team can be coordinated through you if that's okay, but we've got one here from Kate, so we'll go to that first.
On the para slide, you've got us being responsible for channel maintenance for 5 creeks. I presume those are the yellow catchments?
Yes.
And the pink, and yeah, okay. Confirming that. And then the pink ones are the areas we're not doing any work at the moment, but might need some work?
That's correct.
I'll come back to that later. Monitoring.
Okay, cool. Any other questions?
Have they done any work, gravel maintenance work on those creeks?
So the latest round of monitoring and maintenance, we had a LiDAR survey and we looked at geomorphic change within the creeks over the last couple of years and identified a couple of locations for maintenance. One of those being the area downstream of the concrete chute at Reservoir Creek, between the Reservoir Creek and the Clutha. And in December, I believe, ORC Engineering undertook some maintenance there to improve channel capacity. There's also work planned for Stevenson's Creek as well.
So specifically in your non-structural mitigations, you identified debris removal as a potential mitigant. Has there been any diggers operating in these above the state highway to remove some of the debris?
There has been post 2017. In the last couple of years, there hasn't been above state highway. I don't think so, but there has been prior to that, but after 2017.
The issue is the debris blocks the culverts. I know you've upgraded the culverts, but then that creates the fan upside of the culvert through the town. I think, yeah. Interested for your thoughts on that.
I guess the this new study gives us the background information able to really assess what management, like further management, is needed going forward. In addition to that, we do monitor the geomorphic change, so the change in sediment buildup all the way along the creeks, not just in and around State Highway, but also further up.
I've just got another question from Nathan.
Has landslide or slip hazard identification flowed into this, given the event around that space?
Yes, that's a really good question. We might maybe hold that one for the WSP team. Landslides were taken into account in their modelling.
Do you have a work program to remove debris? To be proactive in managing the debris flow risk rather than
So our engineering team undertake regular surveys of the known sites at the moment, and the outcome of those surveys can be that work's required, and if work's required, they'll get in and remove debris. But at this stage, that's covered 5 creeks. This report now indicates that we potentially need to widen that program, which we've just received the report. We'll consider that and then make some decisions around where to next.
Yeah, cool, Kate.
I was going to ask this later, and maybe a later question. And looking at page 6, the size of a 30-ton boulder looks really scary. And the question I have is, it's not just geomorphic change, but it's also understanding the size of the debris that may be coming down and how close that is and likely to cause problems. So how do we monitor that, which isn't quite the same as a LiDAR? I mean, I'm not quite sure how you test for it. But if you saw that sort of boulder having moved, would you be in there to deal with it alone?
Just wondering how best to answer. I think that the size of individual boulders is definitely important in terms of the flow itself, but I think that we'll have to take a look at the management of the upper reaches, and that might be something that we can look into. But we don't currently specifically look when we go to monitor or manage the release of really large boulders. They're sort of considered in one with any change in elevation, which indicates any change in debris deposition or erosion.
And saying that, staff, upon undertaking visual inspections, if they identified a large boulder had shifted in a smaller event and was now presenting a more imminent hazard, that consider removing that or dealing with it as was appropriate.
Great.
Okay, we will move to the WSP section of the presentation.
Yeah, I only have 2 other slides before we move to WSP about the sharing this information with the public and the next steps. So we have a plan also to, as Julian indicated, an engagement plan and program. And one step in that program is to share the information we presented today with the Tibet community. That's planned for the 18th of February, so next week. Its format is two sessions. One is a drop-in, 3 to 6 p.m., where people can come anytime, and we have people in the room available to talk about the program, to talk about maintenance if needed, and the results, the findings. And at the end of that session, we will have also a presentation with Q&A in the evening. That's a more traditional presentation in a way where WSP will be presenting the results. In addition to this, and this is not on the slide, we also have a lot of resources on the ORC website on Roxburgh. We've done an introduction video that helped trigger the discussion around what debris floods are. We have summary reports, plain language summaries that people can use to get familiar. They don't need to read the full report to get the information they need to, but we can also make that information available, or we are making that full information available, so anyone interested to go into the detail can do it. The purpose of sharing this information is in line with what we've done in the past, so we are adopting a very transparent approach. When we have information, we share it as fast as we can with the community. And that's what we've done in different parts of photography in the past, in Genoki, for example, on the Tari, and that's just another step in our communication around natural hazard in the region and raising awareness.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, we move to WSP now.
Yeah.
Stop hearing this.
I think so. Yeah. So we got the WSP team that assisted us in this work. On the call, we got Harley Porter, geohazard analyst at WSP, and Doug Mason is the principal engineer and geologist at WSP. And both of them will be presenting and available for questions. And they'll be also coming at the community session in next week. Again, Harley and Doug, do you know?
Thanks, Jean-Luc. Kia ora, everyone. My name's Harley Porter. I'm a geohazards analyst at WSP. Been working on this project over the past 12 months. Today, I'm joined by Doug Mason, who was the sort of key technical lead on our project. Just before I start, just confirming, can everyone see my screen? Okay.
We can.
Cool. So today we will overview our debris flow and debris flood study completed in Roxburgh in the Teviot Valley. It's been undertaken over the past 12 months and serves as a planning and resilience investment tool. So just some quick agenda items for today. We'll briefly outline the project background and method. I know Julian and Jean-Luc have given everyone an overview of this already, so I'll do my best to move through this quickly. We'll move on to the debris flood modelling, the risk assessment results, and the implications of this work. I'll pause at key points in the presentation for questions. So just expanding on the intro earlier, our project was broken down into 6 key phases, including hydrogeomorphic hazard modelling, qualitative risk assessment, and quantitative risk assessment, which will be the focus of today's presentation. We assessed 13 catchments located west of the Clutha River that ORC have identified as being potentially exposed to hydrogeomorphic hazards. The assessment included the modelling itself and the estimation of potential impacts on the built environment and exposed populations. So what are we looking at exactly? You've heard me use the term hydrogeomorphic, meaning part of the hazard can be attributed to water and part can be attributed to a landform, such as a soil or rock mass. Essentially, Hydrogeomorphic hazards are fast-moving slurries of debris and fluid that can have devastating impacts on the built and natural environment. And there are different types of hydrogeomorphic hazards, including our fluid-dominated floods and debris floods, and more sediment-dominated debris flows and debris avalanches. Our study identified that debris floods are likely to be the dominant type of hydrogeomorphic hazard in the 13 catchments. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'll refer to the hazard of interest as debris floods. So catchments in our study area are reasonably steep and display many signs of erosional activity that could act as source material for future debris floods. I know just earlier we had a question on landslides. Was that considered in our study? The answer is yes. We considered a range of potential source material, and landslide was included in that. So in the Teviot Valley, regular debris floods have built these alluvial fans at the base of catchments. In some cases, the alluvial fans have been developed with residential areas, such as Reservoir Creek and RN1, sort of pictured in the left image here. Also, many of the channels have been altered and are now confined to follow certain paths with things like stop banks. And this, of course, is essential to protect exposed elements on the fans, but it also restricts channel deposition to a much smaller area, which, if not managed appropriately, can result in consequences. So Roxburgh and the surrounding area has been subject to debris floods, with the most recent and severe debris floods occurring in 1978 and 2017. And a key part of our assessment was digesting historical records, anecdotal information of these events to help us to understand what could occur in the future. So this is just an overview of our methodology. The two key questions of our study were, one, what is the annual debris flood risk for people? And two, what is the annual debris flood risk for buildings? We wanted to know whether these risks were relatively high. Are they acceptable according to certain criteria? And if not, what can we do to mitigate risk? This assessment has several moving parts, but the key inputs have been a hydrological assessment, which established the likely peak flows in each catchment. This considered climate change impacts. Also, we did a geomorphological assessment to understand what drives debris flood hazard and what we can expect from future debris floods in the area. We then modelled potential debris flood events and finally assessed qualitative and quantitative risk for exposed elements on each fan. So that concludes a brief overview of the background and overall framework of the study. Next, I'll touch on the debris flood modelling. So there were three key inputs that allowed us to model debris floods in our catchments of interest. The first being topographical data. So this was in the form of a surface DEM, which captured changes in elevation within catchments and on the fan surfaces. It's essentially just a grid or a raster that allows us to predict where water may flow over a surface. Another key input was the hydrological model. So as I alluded to, we generated stream peak flows in each channel, completed for a range of rainfall events, considering how the intensity and frequency of heavy rainfall events in particular will increase with a changing climate. And the last input there, so our geomorph assessment, this included mapping of debris sources, including landslides, sort of general erosion on the stream banks, and entrained debris already within the channel, which can all act as source material for future debris floods. So this allowed us to estimate the likely available source volume, allowing us to estimate the debris component of the event for modeling. I'll just note that this phase also included ground investigations, which were completed on the fans themselves late last year. And this helped us to validate some of the assumptions we were making around event size, spread, and frequency. Modeling was completed in a software called RAMS, and outputs, including flood height, as seen on this image here, were generated for each catchment. So in total, over 40 models were generated during the study, centered around 3 different sized debris flood scenarios, as shown in the table here. So our smallest but highest frequency event being the suitably named high likelihood event, which we like to describe as sort of similar in size to debris floods that occurred in 2017 in pump station and golf course catchments. While the median likelihood event is characterized by larger debris flood volumes and peak flows in streams due to more intense rainfall, while the maximum credible event is the largest event that we can justify. For this, just think of a catastrophic blank collapse where an exceptionally large volume of material is released into the channel. So historical data gives us an idea of how often each of these event sizes occurs, and by using rainfall triggers and publicly available information, such as the high intensity rainfall design system developed by Earth Science New Zealand, formerly NIWA, we can attribute a return period estimate for each event. So our study considered how this return period may change with climate change. For this, we used a sort of what is thought to be a worst case climate scenario, which sees increased emissions, warming, and more frequent and intense rainfall. So that gives you a bit of a flavor for what is fed into the RAMS software for modeling. 3 debris floods for each catchment were modeled, capturing different sizes and frequencies. This slide here is an example of the flood model outputs showing flood inundation height for the Reservoir Creek fan. Just to note, we completed a sensitivity analysis for this catchment, comparing our outputs to the 2017 debris flood extent, and we calibrated our model to this accordingly. This is another example of debris flood modeling outputs for Slaughterhouse Creek, which is a catchment to the north of Roxburgh Township. So Slaughterhouse is one of the larger catchments and alluvial fans in our study area, with a relatively large area of potential source material compared to other catchments in the study. And you can find outputs like this for each of the catchments in our technical report. So just moving on to the qualitative risk assessment part of the study now, for which our RAMS modeling sort of formed the, I guess, the base layer, if you like, and we overlay exposed buildings, people, and infrastructure to start to get some ideas about risk. So the qualitative risk assessment was used as a screening tool, if you like, to identify the highest risk catchments in the study and prioritize them for further analysis. Risk is typically defined as a product of hazard likelihood and consequence. And as I briefly mentioned, we were able to use historical events to determine the first part of this equation, the hazard likelihood. So this combining this with our RAMS model outputs, we were able to estimate the consequences when we looked at existing data sets of where buildings are currently located, where people are likely to be and where lifelines and critical infrastructure are located on each fan. So in particular, we looked at how debris flood height and velocity interacted with these exposed elements. And we were able to use existing studies that sort of define these relationships. We used the APP6 risk assessment framework, which is centered around the table to the left of the screen here, and is colored according to the overall sort of acceptability of that risk, where green is determined to be acceptable, yellow is tolerable, and red is significant risk. This framework also outlines when quantitative risk assessment is required for a catchment, which is covered using sort of hatching in that table there. So to our results, displayed on the table on the right, that is ordered with catchments from the highest qualitative risk to the lowest. You can see our event sizes across the top there, and then the highest assessed risk, which is what we use to determine whether quantitative risk assessment was required according to the APP6 framework. So catchments at the top of that list stood out because a high proportion of buildings were estimated to be damaged in each event. There were a number of high fatalities or injuries, or that impacts to lifelines were comparatively high. We ended up progressing with all of the catchments for quantitative risk assessment apart from blackjacks, as even though some of the fans didn't quite reach that threshold for requiring further quantitative risk assessment, we did want to understand risks spatially on these fans for future development. So that's for reservoir, golf course, and RN1. Okay, so far we've covered the modelling and qualitative risk assessment part of the study. Just before we look at the quantitative stage, I'd like to take a moment to pause for any questions.
Okay, looks like we've got silence around our table. CODC, any questions?
No, don't appear to be any questions from here at this point. Thank you.
Okay, we've got one question from Robbie.
Those the models you came up with for a start, and then you overlaid with the 2017 event. How much adjustment did your models require? Were they close for a start, or needed a lot of adjustment?
They were fairly close, and I sort of attribute that to the DEM we were able to use, which was sort of a 1 meter by 1 meter raster across the fan surfaces. So this captured fairly efficiently where water was likely to travel. We had a few events we were able to sort of use to firm up our estimates around likely event volume. And this was supported by the mapping of the catchments, which we were also able to use to support our estimates for event volume. There were the studies done by GNS in 2018, which looked at those 2017 debris flood events in particular, and they had some estimates on debris flood volume, which we were also able to draw on in our study. So our output aligned fairly closely with the extent we mapped for 2017, which was based on an aerial imagery and any photos we could gather from that event. We calibrated, or I should say adjusted, a couple of the parameters within the model to better suit that extent, and this was carried through the rest of our modelling process. But to answer your question, yes, they aligned fairly well and formed a pretty good starting point, and we're able to adjust further.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Harley. Oh, sorry, Kate.
No, that triggered a question I had that I had forgotten I had. But Harley, look, given that the government is moving to your land as a castle sort of, and you can do what you like with it, what is your risk and and what rules COBC or ORC could potentially have or need to stop people doing with best of intent but potentially problematic activities on their land that may change the quantitative risk assessment? And I'm talking about putting in stone walls, for example, best of intent, you want to keep your dog in or something, and you don't realise that it's going to actually possibly aggravate or do something. And I'm just understanding, how would we know if that had happened from this assessment? And who monitors what? And if it's a fence, you don't need consent for it. And that may be a question for later.
It's a complicated matter. So there's a lot of moving parts with any risk assessment and any model. We try our best to capture the most up-to-date information. People will absolutely alter the surface of the fans, and they've been doing that for 200 years in Roxburgh, right? So the streams alone have been in some places diverted to sort of open up areas for pasture and orchards, which does sort of in the way of a domino effect, sort of impact other areas of the fan potentially worse than what was already occurring. And as far as the risk assessment goes, those sort of, I guess, those social issues, such as evacuations, pets, things like that. We make an attempt to capture some of those, but also there's huge sort of uncertainty with those, and they vary person to person. So we try to, I guess, risk in our report and in our assessment is captured for the average person in the Teviot Valley, and those social aspects can be woven in as new information comes up. But yeah, I accept that there's a lot of uncertainty with all the moving parts within the assessment, from people to altering fan surfaces, but using the latest LiDAR is sort of our best guess as it stands.
Okay, thanks for that. John Luke, you've got an answer to that.
Yeah, just to add on that. So this work will be a really good base to discuss the issue you raised, Councillor, around controlling land use with CODC. I think this is really a really good baseline to have that discussion and answer the question on, does land use need to be managed for that purpose? And if yes, how we do it with the different tools that are available in the planning toolbox. As an example, and it's similar but not identical. When we were working with DCC on the second generation district plan, we were thinking about the Tari floodplain and the criticality of overland flow passes. Not the same physical processes, but kind of the same issue where a change of land form or culverts or fences will change the direction of the hazard. And the outcome of that work with DCC was some specific rules around overland flow paths on the Tari, where ORC was involved in proposal to change or put a culvert on in those features. So there is a way. I'm not saying we're going to use the same way in the Teviot Valley, but we've got a precedent in a way that we can use as an example.
Thank you.
Okay, cool, thanks. Harley, we'll move to the next quantitative risk assessment, please.
Cool. So I'll just start with how we calculated risk in a quantitative sense. So for people, life risk was calculated for each alluvial fan using an existing equation, which is known as the annual individual fatality risk equation, or AIFR. And inputs to this calculation can be best illustrated using the schematic on screen. This includes starting at the top, the probability of the hazard occurring, the probability given the hazard occurs, it reaches an exposed element, individual or building, and this is commonly referred to as runout. Also, the probability that an exposed element is present at the time of the event, and finally, the vulnerability of that individual to the hazard, or sort of their susceptibility to the impacts of the hazard. So for buildings, we express risk as annual property risk, and the process for calculating this is in principle the same as people, except buildings are there 100% of the time, so their temporal spatial probability does not change compared to people which move around. The last thing I'll note is buildings also have a different vulnerability to people. They're a different exposed element type. So how did we determine risk spatially? So we know risk changes, and there will be parts of an alluvial fan that are more susceptible to debris inundation, like the channel, for example. So what we've done is assessed risk for each 1 by 1 meter area. We refer to these as grid cells on each alluvial fan. So we then assessed potential inundation from our 3 modeled scenarios, and inputs to the risk equation were assigned to each grid cell and used to calculate risk for that cell. And risk is a combination of the 3 event sizes. So the models identified the areas on each alluvial fan that are more likely to be flooded by debris in future flood events. And when combined with information about how often these events occur and what the impacts might be on people and buildings, the risk maps provide estimated risk values for the affected area of each fan. So what these risk values represent is the chance buildings or individuals have of being impacted by a debris flood in a given time frame. And I guess an example of this, or a way to explain this, is the darkest color on the map on screen represents an annual risk of it's greater than 10 to the minus 3, which in layman's terms is the same as once every 1,000 years, or roughly 8% per lifetime if you assume an 80-year lifetime. So the map here provides the estimated risk to individuals for alluvial fans to the north of Roxburgh Township. So we've got Slaughterhouse Creek there, and similar information for other alluvial fans in this study can be found in the technical report. And this is an example straight out of the technical report. This is Reservoir Creek we're looking at with 4 map frames capturing 4 different but similar risk scenarios. So in brief, the 2 on the left capture risk to people, or AIFR, and the 2 on the right to capture risk to buildings, or annual property risk. So generally speaking, risk to people is higher, as literature states that a person in open space is more vulnerable to a debris flood than a building. These frames also show how risk increases on the fan between a present day scenario, which is captured by the top 2 frames, and a worst case climate change scenario, which is captured on the bottom 2 frames. So the worst case climate change scenario, we have a higher frequency of heavy rainfall events, which result in a higher frequency of debris floods. Therefore, they're occurring more frequently, so the overall risk is increased under climate change. So this is the same outfit, but for Slaughterhouse Creek now, to the north of our study area. So risk on this fan is concentrated near to the channel, but also in zones where our models predict that debris will spill out of the channel and inundate areas of the fan. Particularly for if you look bottom left, the AIFR RCP 8.5 scenario, we've got a build-up of risk around the state highway there. And that sort of shows what we've seen in historical events. The culvert becomes blocked and inundates that area surrounding the culvert. So what was our study able to show that we didn't already know? I guess the key thing is we now have a better idea of where the highest risk areas are on each fan. As Julian mentioned earlier, previously that this hadn't been done at a spatial resolution that sort of we've gone to, looking at it at a 1 meter by 1 meter cell. So our study has highlighted there are areas of significant risk on every fan in the study. However, these are often limited to the channel and low-lying areas of each fan, close to the main channel. Areas of lower risk can help to guide safe development, and I think that's a sort of key pass on from us. And yeah, again, I'll note Appendix H in our report has the key risk map outputs for each catchment and alluvial fan for your information. So lastly, I'll just touch on mitigation. So there are a range of different options available to manage debris flood impacts. We've already talked about physical structures like barriers, channels to redirect flows, retention ponds, settlement basins, that sort of thing. Also thinking about larger capacity culverts, which has already been sort of completed on some of the catchments following 2017. So these physical engineering works can be expensive to construct, or are expensive to construct, and will often require sufficient space to be effective and regular detailed design work, including regular maintenance, to ensure they remain effective over a long period of time.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go for it.
Whose responsibility is it to reduce debris flow impacts?
I would say I guess the responsibility would lie on the council, the sort of
shared responsibility amongst
So I can take that one.
organisations. Yeah,
I can take that one. So OSC plays a role in managing debris flows. At the moment, we monitor a section of a number of the streams and act where build-ups occurring in a way that needs some management. This report provides us with another opportunity to consider other options for managing the flow of debris through the catchment as well. Any organisation that has a structure has also got responsibility for considering the debris flow hazard in the catchment and in which that structure sits. So, for instance, NZTA road culverts, and in the past, TAs, territorial authorities, such as CODC, have taken responsibility for managing some of these hazards as well. And so, the answer to your question is that it's a bit of a multi-agency space, but and that we all play a slightly different role.
It's a massive liability, isn't it? It must be hard to measure and to cost justify how much an organisation would put into reducing it. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. What we might do is, Harley, do you just want to sum up or just finish your part of the presentation and then we'll move to questions?
Sorry, okay.
Sure. Yep. Thanks, guys. So, yeah, I guess I was just going to touch on the non-structural elements we can implement So these include early warning systems, community education, and sort of regular clearing of the existing stream channels and culverts. So these can be more practical and cost-effective ways to help reduce the impacts of debris floods, particularly in small, well-connected communities like Roxburgh. Another layer to that is planning tools like zoning rules and preserving natural buffer areas around the creeks. So this can provide long-term protection by avoiding those significant risk areas likely to be affected by debris floods. However, these require robust council policies and community support to implement. Lastly, long-term adaptation and resilience. So this includes, again, preparing communities and households, allocating resources to strengthen resilience, and embedding some of that local knowledge and mana whenua values within our plans, policies. This sort of, in a way, promotes that collaboration between agencies and communities, bolstering long-term adaptive capacity for debris floods. So just a quick recap of the content covered, and then we can launch into some Q&A. So the Teviot Valley is exposed to debris floods, which can damage the built environment and can threaten people. Modelling and subsequent risk assessment was completed on 13 fans to identify the high-risk areas. The risk maps highlight areas of what's deemed to be acceptable risk, tolerable risk, and significant risk on each fan. And these serve as guidance for future planning and design. So that's our presentation today. Thanks for the engagement and interest you've shown thus far. Yeah, keen to hear any other questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. So basically, yeah, we open her up for questions.
Yeah, Stuart Duncan, Central Target District Council. I'm the chair of our roading network. You're saying that the ORC is not responsible for cleaning out the debris in those waterways?
No, I didn't say that.
Because clearly the gravel extraction has to happen, and the part of the comment you said that it was up to us to do that, so there's nothing stopping us from doing that.
No, I didn't say that at all. So what I said was we monitor the bed levels, monitor the debris that's flowing through a number of the creeks, and act where required to remove some of that debris. Whether or not we act soon enough or dig out enough is obviously a matter for conversation. But what I was trying to say is that when you own or manage or build a culvert, giving effect to understanding both the hazard that sits there and how your culvert might interact with it is an important step. So yeah, I was describing the role of CODC and NZTA in doing that, and then the other point is that CODC has some ownership for the channel, the concrete apron channel that runs through Reservoir Creek as well. Where we share some responsibility there. So just alluding to those matters.
So if we feel that there's an issue with the debris in the channel and you don't, how do we progress that and move forward?
Give us a bell and we'll work it through. I think it's the short answer.
How much active management of debris post the 2017 cleanup has ORC undertaken in terms of, and when I say management, physically removing and train debris at the base of Mount Benja on any one of those creeks?
So I don't have a staff member present that could give you a detailed rundown of all of the cleaning activities that has occurred between then and now. But I can say that there has been several. There are some work planned in the near term and some carried out just late last year. Some of that work is minor. Some of that work more closer to the 2017 event would have been much more major.
Thank you. I've got Neil and now in here. We've got Neil, Gretchen, and Kate, and Andrew, and we'll also just sing out CIDC for questions from yourselves too. Neil.
Thanks, Gary. Just wondering in the study you've done and what impact, or sorry, what you've used as the basis of the current infrastructure with culverts in particular, and whether they become a barrier and the cause of some of the issues. I guess the scenarios consider that if you didn't have these culverts and you had a natural channel, what would happen then? Try to understand just how much influence the structures we drive over actually make to the impacts of the flows.
Thanks, Neil. I could probably give you a bit of an idea of how we modelled culverts. So the LiDAR, which is the basis for our modelling, included culvert crossings, and they weren't removed. So essentially, our models are sort of realistic. We have seen culverts being blocked in the past. The only creek that was modelled that didn't have a culvert crossing within the LiDAR was Reservoir, because that's a bridge structure, so that was able to be removed in the survey. And yeah, more to the point, removing culvert structures would, of course, allow more flow to pass through at that location, but of course we need to traverse these streams in some way or another. But I think, yeah, the culvert upgrades that were completed post 2017 would have gone a long way to reducing the likelihood of it backing up there.
So just taking that one step further, then it does mean that going forward, culverts in particular are always going to be a barrier to flow, potentially, as the flow gets bigger.
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Yeah, just think maybe we should have a bit of a reminder of what we're doing with this workshop. Might be just good. So that might be for Tom, like we've got this info and it estimates risk and we're going to go to the community with it. And then that's not full stop. Hey, get on with your usual program of work, ORC. What happens from there now that we've got this info? I know you've said it, but maybe just remind ourselves.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Gretchen. So you brought me most immediate action is to get this material out to the community. The sooner the information is available, the sooner people can make decisions around how they individually respond to a thunderstorm warning or whatever else might occur. There'll be other actions that relates to civil defence and emergency planning, and how does the community deal with these types of events, given that we know that we've got the hazard and we've got the current state of infrastructure in place. And then longer term, we'd start to move into a mode of reviewing all of our programs for managed. So OIC would move into reviewing all of our programs to manage debris within these creeks. That will include looking at things like infrastructure, but also maintenance programs, how regular they are, how aggressive they are, all of that sort of thing. And that would obviously need to be considered for future funding decisions. And at the same time, there's a new suite of information here for available for planning and infrastructure decisions for all of the other agencies that are involved, and we'll continue to work really closely with all of those agencies to provide the best information and also to liaise and make it clear how our programs of debris removal or whatever are likely to interact with whatever they've got planned as well. But yeah, this is really just the start.
And just with this work too, is the scale fine enough that you would be able to say, hey, for this creek, actually, yeah, it's the debris that's sitting in the bottom of the stream that's causing the problem, but actually, I think what we heard today, there's steep catchments with many sources of potential debris, whether it's from the banks, whether it's from the bottom of the creek, or whether it's actually way up high in a thunderplump and there's massive boulders that come rolling down that you can't predict. And obviously, if you take out bottom of a creek, you may be more likely to erode banks, all that stuff. So, is this the type of study that says actually we need that digger in there to remove that little bit of, or again, need to take that case by case in this next stage? Yep.
Yeah, that's correct. So the study gives us a really good insight into where to look and where we carry the most risk, and helps us to prioritise those next steps. But in terms of knowing exactly how much debris to remove from each creek, that'll always be a moving feast and always something that we're having to monitor and consider, and then act accordingly.
Thanks, Kate.
Just wondering, some of this land is covered by golden aggregate permits, and what the opportunities and risks are of those sort of operations. I mean, there's obviously a risk if they take out some gravel that exacerbates some flows, but the opportunity of working with those sort of potential permits holders to do our work for us at cost effectively. And I'm just wondering, is that explored? What is the process to explore that? I know it's a tricky one when we're a regulatory body ourselves.
Has not been considered yet, but something we can throw at the mix for any future work.
Andrew.
Can I ask on the maintenance, as I said before, that whose responsibility is it, given that DOC have some control over Reservoir Creek? I don't understand the demarcation of responsibility there. How does that work?
DOC would be a landowner like any other landowner in this case, I think. And if we were, if ORC were seeking to manage debris source or to try and manage the hazard that way on DOC land, that'd be a conversation we'd have to have for DOC. But I am not aware of any situations where DOC is managing erosion or sediment load actively in a high country catchment like Reservoir Creek.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My question is around the multiple ownership of the land. Obviously, this is public land and there is private land. And in the worst or high risk areas, is it beneficial or is it practical to look at some sort of vegetation establishment in those areas, or simply because of the scale of what we're dealing with, it wouldn't be beneficial? Because I sense that if it was, it would have been done by now. Any thoughts?
I don't see Harley or Doug, you want to comment on that and role of vegetation or revegetating some of the catchments?
Yep. Vegetation always helps, but it's limited in its effectiveness, I'd say. And given the scale of the events that we've looked at, it's probably not going to make a sufficient difference to really reduce the areas of significant risk, particularly in those large, very large scenarios.
Yes. Thank you.
Question, please. Over here. I just want to check when we go to the community of Roxburgh with this next week together, lucky us, have you got sufficient information to cover off those inevitable questions about what this means for those individual property owners and their limbs once these maps become public and inevitably end up on including the aspects of Westport and their inability to insure individual properties?
So we've worked with CODC on that work right from the scoping stage, and the question around them and including this information on them will sit with CODC. In terms of being prepared for next week, yes, we have a lot of material to support the discussion with property owners. And the question around insurance is interesting. The information we have is a refinement of existing mapping that's been out for 2 years now. It's not a new hazard. It's a refinement of something that was already in the public domain. Impact on insurance is not straight, like a new or refined hazard information. We don't have a straight relationship between this and level of insurance. Insurance company will take a wide source of information to make that decision, and it's case by case. So what we've done, we've contacted the in the past, not specifically for Roxburgh, but in general, when we have natural hazard information, we've contacted the Insurance Council and asking them what do they do with the information, and they've responded to us with a letter explaining how this information is taken into account, and that letter can be shared with any landowner if needed. But what the letter is saying really is insurance company make case by case decision. Hazard is one part of the decision, and hazard maps are one part of the risk assessment they do. They've got also their own models to assess risk related to hazard that we don't have control on. So in a nutshell, it's the information we provide may or may not be taken into account by insurance council, by insurance companies at property level, and
I guess it's going to cause a huge amount of worry and stress for those individual property owners who now see their property within those newly defined maps, which, recognising it has been identified for a long time and it is known to the Roxburgh community that is a risk, but these maps really highlight an elevated risk of what they perhaps were looking at previously. I just want to make sure we've got sufficient information to be able to communicate what the level of risk is to those individual property owners when they turn up in person. They will inevitably turn up in person. Roxburgh love in person. So I just want to make sure that we and you and civil defence and whoever else needs to be there are 100% prepared for those conversations.
Yeah, so no, I think in a nutshell, we are as prepared as we're able to be. We've got a new widespread information set. We do need to share it for a range of reasons, but there is potential downside for a number of landowners, and having material like the stuff that Jean-Luc's described, but also just being able to talk through these issues with people and try and provide context is going to be part of the session. We would, I think, if anyone's talking to any constituents that they think will be likely to attend, we do have a 3-hour block at the start, which is designed for one-on-one conversations. We'll have in the order of 10 staff, potentially more from different agencies, all available to have a one-on-one chat and actually go into quite a bit of detail with people. So if you are contacted, please do try and encourage people to make it to that session. I think it will have real values, especially in the cases that you're talking about.
That'd be great. And I will encourage them, and I'm sure Curtis will encourage them to come early to have those one-on-one conversations, because that valley do love turning up at a set time and getting in their chair and ready for a public presentation meeting. So if we can get more of those individual property owners along to have a one-on-one discussion about their specific situation, I think that would be helpful.
Right, thanks. Al.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking at page 10 of the ORC presentation, which helpfully sets out the power framework, hazard management approaches and responsibilities. Now, this may be out of scope of this presentation and reporting paper, but what I really want to know as a councillor is if the measures that we have already in place and across a number of agencies to keep people and property safe are adequate. And I guess this is going to come up at the community meetings too. And I'm thinking in particular around the monitoring and forecasting and early warning systems is really relevant.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. Yeah, really important that we look at all of the aspects of how we respond to these types of events and make sure that all the systems whether they be infrastructural or community-based response as part as they can be.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I'm reflecting on awful events in the Bay of Plenty in recent weeks, and the information we have we acted on that as best we possibly can, and I know this is part of that process.
Andrew, one more.
Yeah, sorry. If you go to page 14 under results, I just want to make sure that I fully understand that the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 listed in terms of catchments, they're all outside the residential zone. Have I got that right? I'm not saying it's not a risk, but I'm just asking the question, are those first 7 outside the existing residential zones?
So are you referring to the WSP?
Yes, I am. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Page 14, the WSP, big one.
So are you including up to
GS1
up to GS1?
down to G from PN1.
P1 okay. I believe that all of those catchments are. This is my belief, is that they are in the designated rural area, but they do have houses on them still. I believe that all of those are zoned as rural at the moment.
Yeah, I recognise it's still a risk, but I was just trying to understand the intensification of the risk.
Yes, they are more rural. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and probably just going back to what Tamer is saying, that to me, that when I see all those reds, I'm stressing, but when I actually find that I'm actually living by a golf course, I actually shouldn't be stressing to the same degree. So I think it's probably actually really critical that when we start these conversations, that we're in fact the first nervous lady that comes in, we actually establish where she is and what her property is exactly facing. To me, that's the absolute key to it. That's that comment. And could I have one other comment while I'm here? Going back to page 10 on the first one. So I think it was page 10, which Councillor Somerville was talking about. I'm just wondering, this has happened 38, 78 and 2018 was sort of 40 years apart, every event that has happened. So it's a well-known thing that happens in Roxburgh, and I can say, and 93 as well, I think it was. So I can say I've seen 3 of them. I did miss the 38 one because I wasn't around then, but probably some people thought I probably was. But in reality, it's just not, to me, this is a stock take with some very efficient and very good technical expertise around it that will enable our community to sit down and look at their risks and actually form strong mitigation programs and just to going forward. So to me, is this just not again giving a far better picture of what we've probably guessed at in 38, 78 and 93 and even probably 17 because we didn't have this data, and now it gives us the opportunity, because when you look at that in 10, it's got all these agencies that should be doing something, but to me, this is the absolute time where we pull all these agencies together and say, well, let's get this to the best possible position going forward. Is this what we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, broadly. Broadly, and I think one other thing you just touched on there is it gives us the ability to, for the likes of the Insurance Council and other parties to consider the risks specific to Roxburgh in a framework that's used nationally. So you can compare this the risk that we've described in technically in Roxburgh to the risks of, say, Port Hills landslide or rockfall and other natural hazard risks that are being assessed in the same way around the country, of which there are many.
Okay, thanks. I'm conscious that CODC need to be away at 12:30.
I've got one question.
Yes, and I have a quick question too for community board reps. So we'll go to your questions first.
Yeah, Tracy Patterson here. Hey, look, all of this stuff is really great information, and following on from a lot of the themes that are coming around the table, the bottom line is we can have all the written reports in the world, but what are we actually doing? It's the doing that is going, and the I guess the maintenance work that's actually going to make sure we save people property. So while I accept there has to be a level of this, what I want to know is what's being set up so that the doing is actually happening.
Yeah, totally. What we do next is the most crucial part. And so that is a very valid question. Do you have another question as well?
No. Oh, yes, one quick question. Just wondering how we're going to do that under a 4% rates cap.
Oh, running two councils.
Pretty simple.
Yeah. We have much more stages to go on this. I have a quick question for the community board reps, and this is just around the engagement we're proposing for next week. Are you happy with that? Is that enough? Do we need to do more? Do we need to do less? I think we will get the people along. What are your thoughts with that?
I think it's pretty good at this stage. I'll give you forewarning. People will want to know who's responsible for managing debris and what is the plan for managing debris, because they're very practical people and they know the landscape and they know the biggest mitigant to house damage, loss of life, injury is managing the debris that sits at the base of Mount Bench. I'm not talking about the upper reaches. I'm talking about the entrained debris that sits at the base of the mountain above the town. They're going to want to know who's responsible for that and what is the plan for dealing with that. So I would suggest in the nicest possible way, have some answers that may appease their worries about it or satisfy them.
Yeah, I agree with what Curtis has said. I mean, it's going to be a hell of a shock to everybody, and yeah, the question is going to be what's being done and what is going to be done, and what are the standards of cleared culverts and cleared river flows that we can expect.
Yeah, no, we need to make sure that the team are ready for those questions in that session.
And I guess Stuart Duncan here, and I guess following on from that, who is responsible? Because clearly, if it's not ORC or they haven't got the budget for it, we've got to be starting looking at that in the south going forward, because they're our ratepayers ultimately. But we need to find out who is responsible, and well, your ratepayers too. But I mean, if it has to be. And where are the trigger points for cleaning out? I guess that's the thing. If you look there and you can put studies after study, but where is the trigger point where you have to move debris?
Exactly. Very valid point.
You don't do that.
Okay. Kate, you've got a question?
Yeah, I think we also have to say, look, when you look at this and the number of houses affected, it's actually, I'm quite impressed with what has happened and the planning restrictions that have stopped some development in sites which weren't suitable. What I can't tell, and I'd like Andrew's question, I'm just wondering whether we're better to present the red catchments in a different way so that we don't see the red and the yellow, the risk matrix on the catchments as such, and that would be helpful. The other part of that is to understand the difference between commercial, residential and disparages and what those risks are. And it's hard to tell, again, how many of these are actual houses or how much of the places affected here are commercial. And understanding that the risk matrix or the way that planning generally works is allowing commercial in higher risk areas than places you sleep, and for obvious reasons, and that will change that picture as well. I think, yes, there are risks, and we all live with risks, but I actually am pretty impressed at the planning or what has happened, and maybe it be people just understanding the ground, that there is less development in some of these areas than you would have otherwise expected. So I don't want to over-amp the risks, here, and I think that that's not just by chance. So yeah, but having said all that, absolutely understanding the river management and what the budgets look like and how that is managed proactively is where we'd be concentrating as an ORC.
Definitely. No, valid points. Tamer, I'm conscious of time. Did you have any final comments before you guys needed to be away?
No, thank you for including us, and we are looking forward to seeing you next week.
Great, thank you. We'll see you then. We've still got more time with this, haven't we? So we can continue on. And whoever else, Debbie, others online can listen in if they wish to. Or are we wanting to wrap up?
Not adding more stuff
we're
if
probably
everyone's
done.
comfortable.
We're done?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll just say thank you very much to everybody.
I just got one thing that's really minor.
God, we just wrapped up. Go
Yeah,
on.
no, but get some names for those other ones rather than PS1 and PS2 and
Yeah.
PlayStation.
Yes.
Just Curtis, someone up there, and say get some names. I know it's totally not going to change things, but before it becomes
Make it more user friendly.
well, especially for the local community, that's and little things like that will actually help them understand as well.
Those catchments are really small and currently unnamed creeks.
It's an opportunity to name it after you, Neil.
No. Curtis, Pettit, Mark Jessup, those two, but yeah, just a really minor detail, not relevant to the big picture, but actually might help for the community to know it.
Don't call them dire either. It won't.
Okay, right. Well, thanks very much, everyone. We'll wrap up now and forward to next week and a robust week. Okay, thank you.